Hello, Dr. Dawes, once again.
Hey, how are you doing?
Pretty good, pretty good. How are you?
Good. I'm really glad to see that it all worked out. The technology had me a little bit fearful, so.
Yeah, it's a pretty simple process. Sometimes it's just a problem because Instagram makes a mistake because of some technical error, but we can always end it
Yep.
and start it all over again. But thankfully that didn't happen, so it's all good.
Yeah, perfect.
Awesome. So, Dr. Dawes, thank you so much for being here, taking out the time. Let me quickly introduce you to our audience. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Big Geek Show. Today we have a special guest, Dr. Jay Dawes, that I wanted to get on the show from a long time, and we finally got time to coordinate with our schedules, and here we are. So, Dr. Dawes is an assistant professor at Oklahoma State University in applied exercise science. He is an NSCA CSCS, CPT, TSACF, which is nothing but tactical strength and conditioning facilitator certification. He's an FNSCA, which is you also a fellow of NSCA, right?
Yes, correct.
Awesome. And he's also a clinical exercise specialist from the ACSM and ASCA level 2 coach. That's a lot of certifications attached to your name.
Yeah, it actually looks pretty obnoxious, really. It's that's one of those things where normally in my signature line for the university, I only put two or three that are most
Okay.
relevant to what I'm doing. But yeah, it is. Yeah, I've got a few certifications, and it's been really good. Each one has afforded me different content
Right.
knowledge that have been
Right.
really important. So yeah.
That is great. So, Dr. Doss, again, I want to thank you for being here. Could you please quickly introduce yourself and how you got into this field? What motivated you to do what you're doing right now?
Yeah, right. So, no, and again, I really appreciate the opportunity to get to speak with everybody today. It's an honor and a pleasure to be with you all. And, I'm just really excited that somebody actually kind of wants to hear what my story is. So, yeah, so I actually, it's a funny story. So I started out as a very obese child,
Oh,
and I got cut from my, junior high baseball team, and it just completely devastated me. And it was one of those things where, after the, initial, pain of having that happen kind of started to subside, it kind of pushed me into, okay, well, what's next? And, I really wanted to play baseball at that point. All my friends were playing. I thought at that time it was going to be my passion in life. And so I started reading about fitness and nutrition. And, at 13 years old, really started dedicating my life to those pursuits. Um, Fortunately, at 13 years old, you're so anabolic that you can do a lot of things wrong and still get some pretty decent results from it.
mhm.
So I saw a massive improvement in the short amount of time that I started doing that. And so the following year, I was able to come back out and make the team, and also had an opportunity to play with some of the high school athletes and things like that. So long term wise, it actually led to a couple years of playing college baseball, which was fantastic. But my sophomore year, I ended up getting injured. So I had an elbow injury. It was the second one I had. I required another surgery for it, but at that point, I started to kind of realize that maybe this is not the route I want to go. And the more I really started sitting down and kind of doing a little bit of soul searching, realized that I actually probably enjoyed the process of getting ready for the season, maybe even more than I actually enjoyed actually playing. And so that really led to a really nice transition into strength conditioning for me. So when I finished my brief college career, the softball coach at the university that I was at said, "Hey, we'd like you to maybe come out and help teach some hitting techniques and throwing and things like that with our female athletes." And I basically said, "Well, yeah, I'd be game to do that, but I'd really like to be their strength coach as well." And so that was really kind of my first strength conditioning gig. So, at 20 years old, I basically kind of started out in this area, not really 100% knowing what I was doing, but really just had a huge passion and enthusiasm for performance and trying to help people get better. Because I think for me personally, I saw what a big transformation it had in my life and how that transitioned into other aspects of my life as well. So I thought, at that point in time, if I could help do that for other people, then that would be, a dream come true. So I did that for several years. Went on to graduate school at Oklahoma State University, where I currently teach now, and got my degree in health and human performance. All the while I did that, I worked as a personal trainer and did a lot of athletic development type things with youth athletes and things of that nature. And actually during grad school, I actually worked as a post-rehab specialist, as well as a senior fitness specialist as well. So I had some pretty diverse experiences, which, in the long run actually served me very well in other roles that I got to be in the future. But I ended up, had a full-time job offered at a hospital here in Stillwater as a clinical exercise specialist, and I actually turned it down to be an independent contractor. So I went from basically a guaranteed salary and benefits to absolutely nothing, except for, whatever you earn is what you get to keep. And did that because the person that asked me to come work with them was doing all the things that I want to do. So the guy was, on the board of directors for the NSCA. He was writing books. He was a column editor of the Strength Conditioning Journal. And I knew at that point, I was like, man, if that's really what I want to do, I need to go learn from this person. So really, my wife, we took the leap, and she allowed me to go pursue that opportunity. And I think within the first month and a half, I think I made like $120. And I'm like, I've literally made the worst mistake of my life. and then it started to snowball after that, where, one person saw, got good results, and then another, and so on and so forth. And, eventually I got to the point where I purchased that business from the individual that I was working for, and ran it for about 7 years before I was asked to apply for a position at the National Strength Conditioning Association as their education director. And that was one of those things, I was, 29 years old at the time, and, that wasn't really something on my radar. Like I owned a performance training facility that was, 6,000 square feet, which, conversion wise, I don't know what that is, but it was a big space. I was working with, athletes that were, all the way from, Little League to the elite level to, Paralympic sport. And it was everything that I'd hoped it could be. So the position at the NSCA really kind of came out of left field. And so somebody said, hey, we'd really like you to apply for this. Are you interested? And my first thought was like, well, not really. And then I started thinking about it, like, with the connections and with the opportunity that I could have in that position, I couldn't make those connections in a lifetime in where I was at. So at that time, left behind our training facility and sold it to some of the coaches and trainers that had worked for me. And we moved to Colorado, where I got to serve as the education director for the NSCA for about 3.5 years. At that point, I was definitely way in over my head. It was a very steep learning curve, but that's what I always joke about. I was like, I got 10 years of experience in the 3 years I was there. But it really taught me how to be a better educator and how to teach concepts of strength conditioning better, because you learn from those around you, and at that point I had access to some of the best in the world. So I just tried to soak up as much information, as much knowledge as I possibly could. So during that process, I was actually still pursuing my PhD. So I was about 6 years into it at that point. So I was on the long plan, and decided that, I think I really want to go back to teaching, and I'd like to start maybe pursuing research, which is something I really hadn't done a lot of. But I was getting really excited about the area of tactical strength conditioning, so working with first responders and police and athletes and things of that nature. So transitioned out and took a job at Texas A&M University Corpus Christi. And during that time frame, I actually completed my PhD and was an assistant professor down there for about 3 years. Was very fortunate. I got to work with the Corpus Christi Police Department for that duration of time as well. So, the thing that was very important to me was always trying to have that balance between, educator, researcher, and coach. And, by being around athletes and being around, these occupational athletes every day, I felt like it really kept me very well balanced between the two different worlds that sometimes don't always agree with one another. Because a lot of times, in the academic setting, things look a certain way when you read the textbook, but when you try and apply that in the real world, it just doesn't work. So it's trying to take those best practices that we get from, the research and whatnot, and then apply it to my specific situation. So for me, I feel like that really helps keep me pretty balanced between both sides of that fence. So, any information we give out is very practical recommendations. But anyway, so moving from there, I was down there for about 3.5 years, got an opportunity to move back to Colorado, where I was a associate professor of strength and conditioning for the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. During that time, I was also the athletic performance coordinator for the university. So me and 4 to 5 of my graduate students actually helped design and implement all the strength conditioning programs for all of our intercollegiate sports there. So it was a great opportunity, a very hands-on program where, the students got to learn by doing and really apply those concepts they're getting in classroom to actual athletes. So did that for 6 years. During that time frame, got even more heavily entrenched with the tactical side of things, where I did a lot of work with the Colorado State Patrol, the Colorado Springs Fire Department. So me and a couple of grad students, we actually ran the training academy, physical conditioning, for about 3 years for those folks, and got to do some research with some of our military special operations groups there, and so on and so forth. And then just last year, the opportunity came to actually come back to my alma mater at Oklahoma State, and hopefully, kind of bring back some of those things to, here where I originally came from. So, for me, it's been a real dream come true. The people here have been so overwhelmingly supportive of me. The great thing is, I'm currently working with a handful of my mentors. So Dr. Bert Jacobson and Dr. Doug Smith, who, saw me, they've watched me basically throughout the course of my career for the last 20 years. So now to be able to work with those guys has just been amazing. And then Dr. Michael Trevino and Jason DeFreitas and, all the folks that are here. It's a great team and a great environment. So I think one of the big things I was really excited about getting to come back to Oklahoma and coming back especially to my alma mater is, I was basically a farm boy who grew up on a small farm in the middle of Oklahoma. And I've got to literally go all over the world and have all these amazing experiences and literally have friends across the globe. And I think just to be able to come back and tell our students that, it's like, hey, 20 years ago, I was sitting in the exact same seat you were, and literally I've got to do things that I only dreamt about doing. So it's been an awesome process for me, and I think that's the big thing is you get to a certain point where it's important that you're still accomplishing your own career goals, but probably one of the biggest ones I have right now is to facilitate that for other people. And again, this profession, this career has completely changed my life. Some of my best friends are my colleagues as well, and it's just been an amazing ride. And the thing I always go back to is, like, I remember standing on the Great Wall of China and thinking, if I hadn't been a little fat kid at 13 years old, I would not be sitting on the Great Wall of China right now. So it's been an amazing ride, man. I've been really, really fortunate. So.
Oh, that's great. That's quite a journey. It's really nice to.
That's not the short version.
Oh, no, that's fine. That's fine. I mean, the deeper you can go, the better. So, Dr. Dawes, I can see your passion for the tactical population, and that, I assume, might have led you to writing a book on TRX, because that was founded by Randy Hetrick, who is an ex-Navy SEAL. So, could you please explain to us how you got interested in TRX? When did you start using it in your own training, and how you decided to write a book on it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first time I was exposed to the TRX suspension training system was when I was actually working at the NSCA in Colorado Springs. So this probably would have been about 2007, 2008-ish. So, we were, at the NSCA, they bring a lot of products in to allow people to sample them and try them. And so we got a sample donated. And so, just looking at all the different ways that you can manipulate body weight with it to change the training stimuli up, for, not only seeing performance improvements, but also working on health and rehabilitation and prehabilitation purposes, it was just a really great tool. So, that initial exposure kind of led me to the ability to, start doing a little bit more of a deeper dive into, all the things that you could do with the TRX suspension training and how it can be utilized in, more traditional programming. Because, I think a lot of times what happens is people see a book on TRX and they think, oh, that's all you do. It's like, well, You can have standalone workouts with it, but it really should be part of a bigger integrated training model. And especially depending on what the individual's goals might be.
Okay, that's great. When did you decide on writing the book on TRX?
Yeah, so it was really interesting. So I was actually approached by a colleague who was, talking to Human Kinetics about doing this book. Somehow along the line, my name got brought up as being a possible co-author on it. And so as we started going through the process, the person who initially reached out to me said, hey, I'm not able to do it anymore, but they'd still like you to move forward with it. So I, by default, I very fortunately got to continue on with the project.
Awesome. All right. So coming back to the TRX, it's pretty famous in India as of now. Right now, I got introduced to the TRX when I think that was in 2011. I got introduced to the TRX, which is pretty later than when you got introduced to it. And in India, TRX has gotten famous in the past maybe 3 or 4 years. So in many gyms, you'll find the TRX, and there are a lot of other companies that are duplicating suspension training systems, but the quality is not as good as the TRX. And the worst thing is that they love the product, but nobody knows how to use it. So I see, yeah. So I see people struggling. The trainers are struggling who haven't had like a professional course in that, or some kind of education. So is there a population that can do it, and is there a population that can't do the TRX?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I think, as most things, the answer is it depends. So, normally you would think that populations that may have any kind of, serious like balance limitations, it would be a little bit more challenging. However, I will say this, depending on how you're implementing and utilizing the tool, it can actually be effective in those groups as well, because we've had individuals that, older individuals who were balance challenged do like a sit to stand, where they use a suspension training system to actually help provide stability and balance as they're going through that process, and actually pull up a little bit to assist the legs in that process, and develop lower body strength. So I'm hesitant to say that I think it's not necessarily a bad tool for anybody. There's just bad applications if you're not careful about it. And I think that's really what you have to do, is use an element of common sense and look at risk and reward. So if I were to use this particular exercise and or tool with this particular population, is the benefit greater than what the potential risk would be? And if that's the case, then that might be something you would choose to do. But it really is one of the things, like every situation really does need to be evaluated, on its own.
Okay. And when it comes to my personal experience, I have the tactical version of TRX, and that has been the lifesaver of me during this pandemic time, because the gyms are closed, and I can do the workouts in any angles, or target any muscles, and it's all compound based movements, and there's a lot of core activation. So for me, it's worked out really well. But a lot of people are confused, and I was one of them about like a few years ago. I used to think that it's not really good for muscular hypertrophy. It is only traditional weightlifting or weight training is good for hypertrophy. But now I've been proven wrong, because I have been making a lot of gains during this time. I've maintained muscle mass, probably even loss of fat. So what do you have to say about that? Is it okay for muscle hypertrophy?
Yeah, I think it's definitely achievable with it. Now, again, it kind of depends on what level of fitness that you're at and where you're at on that continuum. So for people who are very muscular, is it going to be the only thing that they need? Probably not, but it can definitely supplement what they're doing and or help reduce, any, detraining effect that might occur as well. So, just having that little bit of stimulation on the muscles can help maintain that muscle mass to a certain extent. One of the things, and we even kind of talked about this in the book, where, they asked me to do a section on hypertrophy and one on strength and power. And, some of the things we have to look at is, it's not necessarily always the best option for hypertrophy for somebody, but it can certainly be utilized to complement other forms of training. So for instance, similar to, some very, common hypertrophic type workouts like strip sets. or burnout sets and things like that. So you can actually incorporate those into a strip set to increase the overall volume of training, which is very good for hypertrophy. So, for instance, you may start out doing a traditional, I don't want to say bicep curl, and you do X number of sets doing that, utilizing a resistance that, with a dumbbell. And then once you get to the point where you can't lift that any longer, then transition into maybe some TRX work where you could continue to
Dr.
add.
Dawes, I'm sorry to cut you off. Your video has paused for some reason.
Oh, can you see me?
No, it's still like going round and round for some reason. Can you see me and hear me?
Yes. Oh, there we go.
Now you're back. Now you're back. Yes. Awesome.
Sorry about that.
Sorry to cut you off. No, that's okay.
Yeah, no worries. So I'm not sure where that cut me off, so I'm happy to start from any point you want. But
yes, so you said that the individual, well, one sec. I was so into the conversation that I forgot where you ended. Okay, so you said that definitely for other components of fitness that can be integrated and not, not for a person who's extremely muscular.
Yeah, exactly. So, some things that can be utilized for are, ways to complement traditional training programs. So as I was probably talking to myself with a while ago, in order to increase the overall volume of training, so you can utilize it kind of like you do a strip set. So, use like a, whatever your normal weight is of a dumbbell that you would normally do like a bicep curl or whatever it may be, and then transition in and finish up with some lighter weight on the TRX. So again, you're able to augment the overall training effect by getting a larger volume of training, which is good for hypertrophic gains. Some of the other stuff that we're seeing now as far as research goes is you can actually see hypertrophic gains with a lot less weight than what we originally thought. Kind of the sweet spot, most people would generally agree is between like 6 to 12 reps. So if you're able to get more than 12 reps on a given exercise, it's probably going to gravitate a little bit toward muscular endurance. But if there's a larger volume of that, then it can lead to some hypertrophy. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to necessarily optimize it, but it does mean that you can definitely complement it and still build a little bit. And I think that's what it really gets down to is it's what's the optimal or ideal way of training, and then what are things that can also work and complement that as well.
Okay.
But one of the big factors on it, and even kind of going into that was looking at strength. So with the TRX, like for a lot of people who are very strong, it's very hard to develop strength using a TRX because the load that they're using is just not that great. But one of the things that we've done in the past is use that to complement training from a rehabilitation standpoint. So one of the things we've done is your throwers 10 and like your different types of shoulder rotational exercises using the TRX to maybe load those up just a little bit more and perform like some ancillary work between heavier sets with that. Other things that we've seen is we've actually utilized it as kind of a warm-up as well for like a strength training session. So if you look at just by design, anytime you're, there's kind of a paradox. So anytime you're unstable, you're going to hinder force production. So if you're using the TRX for exercises that might be a little bit more unstable, so let's say you're doing like a push-up with your hands in the stirrups, okay, that's going to be inherently unstable, so you're probably not going to be able to produce as much force as you could if you had your feet in the stirrups, you're doing it off the ground. But what does tend to happen is a lot of times when you have your hands in the stirrups, it takes the emphasis off the prime movers and may shift it more to the stabilizers in order to help maintain that control. So the trade-off is you're not able to lift as much load, but it may hit those stabilizers just a little bit more. So then when you go to maybe a heavier set, the stabilizers are woke up a little bit more. So, one thing that, anecdotally, and it's no more than that, when people have used the TRX for those types of activities and gone to a bench press, they said, man, my form feels like cleaner. So especially in the initial learning process, because I was joking when first, somebody starts doing like a squat or a bench press, you see a lot of this going on. Well, after they've gone through that and they learn to kind of use those stabilizers a little bit better, they're able to control the weight to a greater extent. Now, with that being said, that is incredibly anecdotal. I don't have like research study to back that up, but I think that's one way that you could complement a training program with that.
Oh, that's a great idea that you provided. Even though it's anecdotal, there are a lot of research studies that get done because of anecdotal data. So that's completely fine. And it
Well, I would
completely
say
makes sense.
95% of what I've done is 95% of what I've done as a researcher is just to show that what I did as a coach was actually working the way I thought it was. So,
Nice. All right. And I assume I've also seen on TRX that it can be used for rehabilitation of soldiers and athletes or general population. So how is that helpful for rehab? If in case some physiotherapists, physical therapists are watching this.
yeah, I think, probably some of the big ways is, in addition to, utilizing in a traditional gym setting, it's very portable, which
Yeah.
is very helpful when you have somebody who's trying to implement a rehab or prehab program, outside of a normal training facility. So I think, that's one of the big charms in it is the mobility of it. For me personally, like when I travel, like I'll throw that into my bag so I have alternative to a gym workout that I can do in
Mhm.
a hotel room or pretty much anywhere. As you said, like right now during the pandemic with a lot of gyms being closed, it gives you another option, another tool to utilize. And I think that's the big thing is and I'm saying this as a guy who wrote a book on this. It's a great tool. It's certainly not the only tool.
Mhm.
But using it in a rehab setting, I think another charm to it is because you can kind of self-regulate the load by just stepping closer or further away from the anchor
Mhm.
point, then you can
Mhm.
really manipulate the loads that are being utilized to challenge each individual. One of the things we see, or one of the things I've personally seen, is for a lot of those exercises, instead of just grabbing, like a 5 pound weight and doing certain exercises, they're able to load the muscles a little bit more, and actually train them to a greater extent. Now, with that being said, for all my physiotherapy friends that are on, you do know that there are certain muscles like subscapularis and things like that you don't want to necessarily hypertrophy too much because it could cause other issues. But for the most part, you can strengthen and condition the muscles that surround the shoulder girdle in a very, very effective way. We used it a lot with our soccer athletes to do a lot of eccentric training for the hamstrings and a
Mhm.
lot of stabilization of the trunk. And I think that's one of the other cool things is, collateral benefit. I mean, a lot of our athletes love to do arm work, and that's,
Mhm.
for obvious reasons, just because it makes them look good and feel good. And, it's one
Mhm.
of those things where at one point in time I used to argue like, hey, if doing curls will make you a better basketball player and you can explain that to me, then we'll do them. And of course they come back, it's like, oh, psychological advantage, coach. It scares the other team. I'm like, all right, fair enough. So basically, my whole thing is, hey, let's do our whole workout, and then at the end of the training session, we can throw in some TRX work and do like burnout sets with, for the arms and things of that nature. But the thing I really like about it is you get the collateral benefit of trunk stability as well. So, in their mind, they're working their arms, but I'm also trying to work on stability of the trunk and, the glutes, the hamstrings, and all that other stuff in order to help stabilize that. And so we're
Mhm.
getting a lot of collateral benefit from it that they may not necessarily see, but as a coach, I see how it relates to the big picture.
Okay. Okay. Great. And apart from soccer, is there any specific sport that you have encountered that has benefited the most out of TRX use?
Oh man, honestly, we've used it with all of our sports.
Okay.
I think the thing that has been, I don't want to say that any one sport has benefited more than another from it, but I do think one thing that has been beneficial is the training spaces I had at the previous university I was at it wasn't the best. It was
Mhm.
a very small space. We had anywhere from 20 to 40 some athletes that we had to get into a very small area and not have them crossing each other's paths and in
Mhm.
dangerous situation, all that. So having the TRXs really did help because of the versatility of the implement, and so we could set stations out using the TRX and allow them to get a lot of quality work in without having to necessarily go from one side of the gym to the other to sequence exercises in the most appropriate way. So really, it was one of those things. I think that the big thing to really drive home and emphasize on this is the TRX was probably a part of every single training program that we did, but it wasn't ever the entire training program. We basically said, okay, how does this tool fit the goals and the needs of these athletes, and what place do we need to put into the workout for it to make the most sense. And then we try to integrate them in that way. So I think that's the big thing is, if you're doing this at home, and that's the only piece of training equipment that you have, you can certainly get an entire workout using just that. But if you've got access to other training modalities and things like that, it's really about that integration and trying to figure out, okay, what's the optimal device for what I'm trying to accomplish, and can it be optimized with this particular tool in this way?
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so this is with the sports. Now, when it comes to the actual use of TRX that was developed, which was for the tactical population,
Yeah.
how has it benefited first responders and special forces and all that kind of population? How have they liked it, or is there any research that was done on them and the data showed that it was really helpful for them?
So again, a lot of it gets back down to anecdotal reports, but I think the charm in it is kind of like I said before, it's highly portable. So if you're deployed in, the middle of, somewhere where there's austere conditions and there's not a whole lot of, ways to train or maintain fitness, it's an option for you. So I think that's been one of the biggest benefits for those specific populations is it's something that it can use to at least preserve and maintain fitness while they're in those situations. I think, also one of the biggest benefits I've seen is, the ability to actually do pulling exercises when you don't have access to a chin-up bar or other types of, barbells and dumbbells and things like that. Because, you can get away with some things body weight-wise, but it's hard to train back in a lot of ways without having some kind of way to pull or row. So in my experience, that's one of the big ways that we've used it is, the ability to do some kind of a pulling exercise. And some of our pushing stuff we can supplement other ways. But kind of to get back to the original question, because I'm getting a bit off track, I think that's the charm in it. Is the fact that it's versatile, it's portable, and you can use it for a lot of different exercises.
So that's great. I completely agree with the point you made about the back training because even in the gym when I used to go, I used to do all the other stuff, but for the back I used to use TRX because if I go all the way down below the anchor point, then I'm lifting essentially my own body weight, which is quite a lot. It's like 85 kilos on your hands. So it quite. I personally felt it can replace rows to some extent, not completely, but yes, it's a good option.
Well, and so I'll out myself a little bit on this. So I'll be 44 in October, and so we have a family farm that's relatively close, and I was moving really, really big logs. And so I ended up getting probably a grade 1 tear of the brachioradialis. So while at home over the pandemic, I was doing a lot of pull-ups, chin-ups, and variations of that with my body weight. As soon as that happened, it shut it down almost immediately. So transitioning back from a prehabilitation standpoint, I went back to using like bands to where I could pull with the band and not necessarily have to grasp to flare up that particular muscle group. And now I'm transitioning into using the TRX and using like, kind of a 90 degree row and things like that. So on the back of my truck, we have a ladder rack that I put a kayak on. So I'm able to attach it to the top of that. And that was my workout yesterday, was throwing that up there and doing rows. So for me, it's been a nice transition back to what I hope is, my ability to load heavier on that. But like I said, at this stage, it was a good workout, and it was an ability to adjust and adapt, and that's what I joke about at this stage in the game. And I think this is what's funny is the older you get, you start getting more things that you got to work around a little bit. But I'm not going to stop training, so it afforded me another option to allow me to still get some quality work in and movement while I'm in the process of healing, and not have a complete detraining effect.
Awesome. Yes, this is correct. As we age, yes, we do have to work around a lot of other things, but that doesn't mean that we stop training. That's correct. So, Dr. Dawes, is there anything else you would like to talk about the TRX that I missed out?
I think probably one of the biggest things, and I'd ask for feedback from your listeners. So we've been in initial talks about possibly a update on the book. So I think that's the big thing is like if there's anything that I missed the first go around, what would you like to see added to it? What are other areas that would be beneficial to include in the book. I think, that's the big thing is, the purpose of that book is to try and help people in their unique situations. And if there's any way that I can do that, I want to make sure that we're addressing those things. But yeah, looking at it right now, I think, there are several edits that I'd like to make as far as adding additional exercises, probably taking a few out that, when I wrote it, I'm like, yeah, we, thought these were pretty good, and, just time and practice and, trying new things. I thought, yeah, I kind of like these better. So we're gonna have some updates in it that'll be pretty good. But I think that's the big thing is, like, I just be curious to know what the listeners want to see, and feel free to contact me and let me know, and I'm happy to start including some of those things.
That's great. And Dr. Dawes, which other books have you co-authored? Because I know there are a couple of other books that you've written on. I think one is high intensity interval training. Is it that?
Yeah. So we did one that was actually called maximal interval training.
Yes.
That was one. Yeah. So it's funny when I was originally approached to do the book, they wanted to call it high intensity interval training. And it technically isn't, because, if you look at like HIIT training, there's actually a pretty, strict scientific protocol about what true HIIT training is. So, like, like doing Tabatas, like Tabatas aren't really just 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off. Like, there's a certain level of intensity you got to maintain. So just doing something for 20 seconds doesn't really count. So yeah, so they said, hey, can we call this, HIIT training? I'm like, well, it's really not. So that's when they come up with maximal interval training as far as the title. But really what it is, it's looking at, utilizing high intensity style type training within the context of training, other training sessions in order to augment performance. And, I think that's the big thing is, like, with everything that I do, I don't necessarily have, any one specific thing that I do, but it's really the integration of all these different tools and techniques and how do they apply in your specific environments. I've always kind of been from the mentality, like, I don't want to limit my options as far as what I can use. And, why would I want to limit my options on anything that may enhance health, fitness, or performance? So really, we try to do it all. So in that book, it goes through a lot of different type of, circuit-based training. We go into even looking at, like, different sprint work and sprint routines for improving anaerobic capacity. We have some specific sections on sports. So for instance, like tactical strength conditioning, there's some talk in there of that. And then I think the big thing for me is then, okay, the high intensity style training in and of itself isn't an entire program. So how do you integrate that into programs that have specific needs and goals? So, if I'm working with somebody who's a first responder, or somebody who's a baseball athlete or soccer player, how do I integrate that style of training into their program to still make sure that I'm focused on their goals and not necessarily focused on the method of training? So basically, does this method of training match what they need to do, and how do we make that match in order to make sure that it's still keeping them on target for what they want to accomplish? So that's another one that I was very fortunate with a good friend, John Sissick, and John's great, brilliant guy. It's always good when you get to work with people who you consider to be brighter than yourself. So I always learn from everybody that I work with, and feel very fortunate to get to work with some of the best.
That's great. And there's one more book you co-authored, right? Another book, third book?
So there's another one is developing agility and quickness.
Yes.
So that was an NSCA driven product. So we're in the second edition now, which is pretty cool. But so what that one talks about is how to develop agility training programs for specific populations, but really trying to use a step-by-step approach to doing that. Because I think one of the analogies that I use quite a bit is I wouldn't ask you to write a book if you didn't understand the alphabet. So basically what it does, it goes through kind of a movement-based curriculum of, what do you need to do to be efficient at these bigger tasks? Because if you look at like a true agility task in the context of a game, you've got to sprint, cut, change directions, run at a 45, backpedal, so a whole host of other things. And usually that's going to be a response into what the opposite team is doing or your opponent. Most of the drills we do are more static in nature, so they don't really have that same dynamic qualities. However, in an initial learning environment, that's a really good thing. So one, you master the skills and get exceptionally good at the basics, and then we try to integrate it in with a little bit more of, for lack of a better way of saying it, controlled chaos. So now that you have to react and respond to a different stimuli, how do we take those basic skills that we learn and integrate that in? So, kind of as I said similarly before, I wouldn't ask you to write a book if you didn't know the alphabet. So that's what we look at is that, each individual movement pattern is like a letter. And then we figure out, okay, how do we make words by putting those movement combinations together? And then how do we string all those together to have the target outcome of that? And that's really what that book goes into. The cool thing about that one, and one of the things I really enjoy the most, is if you look at the last chapter, is we've got different sport-specific agility training programs from people who are literally some of the best in the field. And, and it's talking about, agility from their own personal experiences and things of that nature, which was another kind of interesting thing about as we were writing the book. We want to do everything evidence-based. And some of the questions that came up in the training programs were like, well, how do you know this is the ideal number of sets and reps? Well, ironically enough, there's not been a whole lot of research on what is ideal in that situation. So, as you said before, a lot of times, the coach who's got to win on Friday is out there driving the science because they don't have time. They don't have 15 years to wait on us to figure out the optimal set and rep scheme. So the cool thing about that for me now is like having all those experts there who have given what their recommendations are and how they program it. Now we can go back in on the backside of that with research and go like, okay, what is the optimal set and rep scheme in order to be efficient at this and to be proficient at it? What's the best approach to go about that? In the past, I think one of the big things we used to see is, with agility programming when I was, growing up in the profession, it's like you go 100% effort all the time or it doesn't count. It's not true speed and agility training. But the reality of it is sometimes you've got to slow those movement down to master the mechanics before you can actually speed them up. So it's that balance between, okay, how much of this is going to be skill development versus how much of this is going to be, top in, maximal efforts, 90 to 100%. And to me, it's really that balance between the two. So it's touching on the basic skills and then speeding it up into more game-like scenarios.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that deep explanation. And Dr. Dawes, where can we access your content? Do you produce any content on YouTube or Instagram or any other place, or your journal articles?
Yeah, so ironically enough, so there's a handful of places, to be completely blunt with you. I don't usually put a bunch up on YouTube because I usually feel like if people don't ask that they don't necessarily want to know. But we actually, at Oklahoma State, we did start a tactical fitness and nutrition website. So on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, we do have that. So that really is geared toward first responders. And getting them the information that they need to be more successful in their occupations. As far as, YouTube and things of that nature, there's been a handful of lectures that I've done that have been posted up from, different conferences and things of that nature. And then probably another really good option is if you go to Google Scholar. Like if there's any kind of like research or anything like that we've done that interests you, you can go there and see like the whole like litany of things that me and the folks I work with have done, and then just hit me up with an email or a message, and I'm happy to send you anything I've got. I really don't have any secrets, so I'm happy to share whatever I've got with whoever wants it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Dawes. Those were all the questions that I had, and I thank you so much for taking the time to address us. I'm sure you have a busy schedule, and again, I'd like to thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. So all the best to you guys, and again, if anybody needs anything, don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you so much. And if at all you meet Dr. Mayhew or talk to him, please say that I said hi.
There's a good chance our paths will cross. So.
Yes, because I tried emailing him, but I think he's not checking his email from a long time. So in case you meet him, please tell me.
There we go. Will do.
Yes. Thank you so much, and have a good day.
You too. Take care.
Yes. Bye-bye.